Okay, let's begin the second half of the symposium. Again, the title of the symposium is Stories from Libya and Beyond, and we'd really like to emphasize those stories here in the second half of the presentation. We have an array of folks who are going to be talking about different communities and different people who have been affected by asbestos exposure, both here in the United States and internationally. So each of the speakers here on our panel will talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up again for questions and answers for all of these folks. So let me just give you a brief introduction of each person here that is at the podium. First of all, we'll hear from Jim Fite, who's the National Secretary of the White Lung Association. This association is a national organization that engages in public education about the hazards of asbestos. Jim himself is also on the board of directors of the Maryland Association of School Board Officials, and he works as the safety officer of Cecil County Public Schools, which serves 16,000 students. In the past, he has served as executive director of the White Lung Association and as president of the Maryland Public Health Association. You'll be glad that you stayed for the second half because he's an outstanding speaker. As is our second speaker, Gayla Benefield. Gayla is a Libby resident and president of the Lincoln County Asbestos Victims Relief Organization. Gayla's father worked at the mine. Both of her parents died of asbestos-related disease. And it was her concerns about reclamation at the mine site that eventually trickled back to Andrew Schneider and led to his reports in 1999. She has spoken to national and international audiences about the Libby situation and her family's experience with asbestos-related disease. Third up, we'll have Colleen Lux. Colleen received her BA from the University of Tulsa, and she's a graduate of the master's program in environmental studies here at the University of Montana. In her thesis work, Colleen interviewed 25 past and present members of the Libby Community Advisory Group and examined their successes as well as their challenges in addressing asbestos-related issues. This spring, while she was traveling in Australia, Colleen took the time to meet with several asbestos victims groups there. And she did this entirely on her own. She was not paid to do it. She didn't have the support of any particular group, but simply took the time out of her own vacation to talk with these folks. And I think that some of the parallels that she will discuss are quite striking between the situation there and the situation in Libby. And then last up, we'll have Bill Ravanese, a Boston area artist and public health activist. Bill has worked as a photojournalist for 30 years covering issues of social significance and has served as the executive director of the Center for Visual Arts in the Public Interest. This work has earned him fellowships and grants from the Ford Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Foundation for Humanities and Public Policy. He's pursued doctoral work in public health at Boston University and currently serves as the Boston Campaign Director for Healthcare Without Harm. And again, Bill's exhibit is on display down at the Missoula Art Museum. So with that, I will turn over the podium to Jim Fite.
Thank you, Steve. I'm very honored to appear before you today. It is humbling to stand beside such giants of America's intellect, such as Brodeur and Schneider, and even more so to be associated with, in my mind, one of America's greatest artists, Bill Ravanese. Any of you interested in the arts should thoroughly look at his work, not just on asbestos, but migrant workers and other aspects of his individual commitment for a better and cleaner earth. Of course, I'm always glad to be with Ray Goldstein and many others who have helped make this, particularly Steve, Laura. Thank you. The White Lung Association brings special greetings to Gayla, Les, and the brave fighters from Libby, whom we are proud to stand shoulder to shoulder. Our discussion today is what is the contribution of the asbestos victim to our knowledge base. And first we start with the word victim because over 25 years ago, when the White Lung Association was just forming, we had long, intense democratic discussions. One of it was what we would call ourselves. And we decided upon victims. Now, many people over the years have said, oh, that makes you look weak. Or they said you confuse things by calling yourselves victims. And as the officer of the Ben & Jerry's Foundation told me as he was turning me down, you brought this on yourselves. How can you be victims? But if you look in the dictionary, a victim is one who has been dealt an unfortunate set of circumstances through no fault of his or her own. They have been dealt these unfortunate set of circumstances many times not by fate, but by the conscious activity of those evil and greedy elements which populate our world. What more tragic victimization than the splash of carcinogenic fibers who will not bear fruit for years into the honest worker's face or into the face of their families. The worker, meanwhile, tolls the daily start bell, paying his or her weekly wage to the grocer, the tax person, the bank, or the church. And at the close of their life, a most terrifying and hideous death. So if we are not victims, who is? As to the history of what the companies knew and how they suppressed the information about their product, how they purchased the safe substitutes and suppressed the use of those, I urge you to read Dr. Castleman's book, Asbestos Medical and Legal Aspects. Neither serious student nor scholar in this arena can be complete without a constant reference to this unparalleled work. But in reading it, no one leaves without a firm understanding of the decades of conspiracy and deceit. I also strongly recommend it and the writings of Mr. Brodeur and Mr. Schneider to standardize your knowledge as to why we call ourselves victims. But how do you get that way? How does one become victimized? Well, you could work in a shipyard, as I did, where 90% of the individuals with 20 years seniority had asbestos disease. Or a steel mill, where the figures were quite similar. One could work in an airplane or auto or truck production or the places where these things were used. One could work in building construction, renovation, or demolition. One could be a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, a painter, a plasterer, a roofer. You could remove windows or replace siding. You could be floors, doors, or mining. You could be a miner. Or manufacturing of the many products. Over 3,000 patents on file for asbestos-containing products. The society which averaged the use of over 500,000 tons of asbestos a year, as we did from 1942 to 1980, has plenty of places and occupations for one to be exposed. Most of what the average person hears about asbestos victims are lies and distortions floated by the spinmeisters of the industry. The amount of victims is always and constantly underestimated. The time of industry's history, where the people were exposed the most, continually changes. First, it was World War II and the shipyards there. That was the great exposure of which we will live through soon. Then, when the cases didn't stop, it was the oil field workers in the 50s. And then the sprayers and construction workers of the 60s. And now, just recently, I heard someone say, well, the majority of our exposure took place in the 70s. And I'm sure that once we get 30 years plus the 70s, we'll begin to see a drop-off of this disease. The truth, so searingly evident to anyone who has worked for their living, knows that asbestos was not just a segment of society, but was intertwined and woven within every aspect of our building materials and many of our common products. Libya is not the exception. Libya is just one more horrible example of the use of asbestos. Even today, the OSHA standard requires the worker to consume 100,000 fibers an hour before the employer is required to provide a respirator. After the discussion of asbestos and its tragedy, we repeat as a society the exposure process with corrupt contractors using Polish, Mexican, San Salvador immigrants to take out the asbestos from our buildings. You have not seen anything yet. The crest of disease is yet to hit. And when it does hit, it will be over and over and over again. Watch what happens in Libya. As the disease grows, the numbers increase. The pollution becomes more unbearable. For Libya is a micro view of our country. Before it's done, asbestos will have claimed millions of victims and cost trillions of dollars. If the World Trade Center has taught us anything, it is that the end is not in sight. Working with asbestos, or standing by the worker, or living with the worker, or walking by the workplace, these are all ways to become a victim. One other thing is necessary. You must breathe, something that we all do. And for a moment here, let's look at asbestos. Asbestos is a very special type of rock. You know, you'll hear the question saying, Well, isn't asbestos everywhere? Isn't asbestos in all mining operations? Isn't asbestos just another rock dust? Blah, 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 blah. More obfuscation, deceit. Asbestos came into being, if you can imagine, huge rivers of molten magma. You've seen pictures of volcanoes which burst forth these liquid metal rivers. Imagine those being encased in plates of earth with tremendous pressure. So asbestos was formed in a very particular way in particular places, a fibrous mineral. And we call the fibrous minerals that you can use commercially, we call those asbestos. This rock has dust, which is different than other rock dust. Asbestos splits down its length, forming tiny spears. The fiber we call a fiber, being 3 times as long as it is wide. The width is less than that of a virus, yet the material has the tensile strength of piano wire. Asbestos was frequently broken down into little fibers, and these were mixed in a slurry, not for fire protection, more industry propaganda, primarily as a binding agent, as a reinforcing agent, as a spiculating agent, the same way that you would use wire in concrete for building a road to hold it together. So these little fibrous pieces of stone were mixed with vinyl, plastic, resin, plaster, cement, etc., oil, paint, so that they would give those substances strength. The special nature of these fibers are that they are very thin and very strong. Explains why they are deadly. But first, let's look at the human lung. Any of you that have butchered or been in the medical business know that the lung is a massive, spongy material made up of over 700 million tiny air sacs. This balloon represents one of those air sacs. Those air sacs fill with the air that you breathe in. In comes the good air. And these air sacs are crisscrossed with many small capillaries. So the blood goes through your body, cleans out your body, brings the carbon dioxide and other minerals back to where gas exchange can take place. The oxygen goes into the blood, carbon dioxide goes into the lungs, and you breathe it out. Now the asbestos fibers floating in the air are breathed into the nostrils and the mouth. And if you note the human anatomy, you'll see that this entire passageway down to the lungs is covered with small little appendages called cilia, little mucus-covered hair-like structures that wave around and catch any particulate matter heading down towards your lungs. And of course, in addition to the absorbing factors that Mr. Brodeur discussed, the hit of the cigarette eliminates these cilia, cuts them off for 3 or 4 or 5 hours till they can grow back. Meaning that after you've smoked, your lung is naked in its defense. These fibers come on down, they drift down, they go down the bronchial tubes, they go down the mat, they get down to the bottom, they find the last alveoli, and they puncture a hole. And that hole becomes scar tissue, and the gas exchange cannot take place. Well, you've got 750 million. You can lose a couple of million and not notice. You can appear to be extremely healthy and yet not be able to walk up a flight of stairs. Slowly but surely, the lungs fill up with scar tissue. Now, take into account a person with a cold or minor flu has 1/3 of their lungs filled with liquid. Now, if you have 1/3 of your lungs, which you have to have 1/3 of them to live, if you have another third as scar tissue, then even the slightest flu or cold means that you are in a tremendously difficult situation. Because of these factors and others, there is an explanation of why so many asbestos victims are diagnosed with some other cause of death besides asbestos. Your lungs have to work harder to get the air in, so your heart has to work harder. If your lungs going twice as fast as somebody else's, your heart is also going twice as fast. So you might be 57 years old and have a 67-year-old heart. Time after time, the death certificate says heart attack, flu, cold, pneumoconiosis, rarely asbestos. The majority of individuals with asbestos disease are not recognized. Our country is so backward we don't even keep track of who dies of what. We don't have the basic epidemiology to proceed to find ways to prevent this. I have seen records of Johns Manville paying compensation to asbestos victims for brain cancer, cancer of the blood, cancer of the pancreas, cancer of the spleen, cancer of the stomach, cancer of the intestines, cancer of the lymph nodes. And as Dr. Silikoff told me decades ago, and published it, asbestos can cause cancer at any site in the body. Simply put, a few very evil and greedy men, and perhaps some women, entered into a national conspiracy to profit from the poisoning of millions of people and hundreds of thousands of properties and land sites. To be a victim, one only needs to work or be close to the process and breathe. You may ask, as many people do, well, Jim, wasn't that in the old days? Weren't they the kind of capitalists that owned slaves and polluted rivers and poisoned people? Don't we have today a new and enlightened grouping? What could they do to us? What can the current purveyors of asbestos do to us? The current crop of asbestos merchants and their insurance companies now push to revive asbestos. Today, as we speak, unnamed clients hire expensive lawyers to harass the EPA to withdraw its warning to brake mechanics. As we speak today, that's going on. On another hand, they go around the country to suppress the information that's coming out of Libby. So as we speak, millions are being spent to deny asbestos victims and their families their constitutional rights. They make no reasonable effort to solve the problem in Congress. They make no effort at all to prevent future sickness. No. They wish to remove the little bit of punishment that is available to the polluters through the U.S. Constitution. Every time I hear some slime ball like Hatch or Hyde cry their crocodile tears about the asbestos victims, my blood runs cold. They only do that as a front to push their nefarious deeds through Congress. They talk about fraudulent lawyers and doctors who are too liberal in their diagnosis. They suggest a solution where everyone wins, their pockets bulging with cash from the asbestos companies. They use our government against us. And just one side point on lawyers and doctors. For the White Lung Association has been a sharp critic of both the plaintiff and defense bar. We are a sharp critic of the medical associations and many of the doctors. But let's ask ourselves, are the doctors and lawyers more corrupt than the presidents, than the senators, than the former head of the Maryland State Police who stole money from the Widows Fund to buy not just one set of underwear for his girlfriend on Valentine's Day, but 6 sets? And it went on and on as he spent thousands of the widow's money on his personal lust. No, the Orrin Hatches of the world would have us believe the problem is fraudulent lawyers. They have lined up people. These fraudulent lawyers have gotten people who are not sick, and have turned the legal system into a cash cow. The reality is there are so many more victims than Mr. Hatch and his cronies want to admit. They want to remove the discussion from that of public health and the environment to one of freeing the victims from the attorney's greed. The defense bar makes more money from these trials than the plaintiff's bar. And for that matter, almost everyone associated with the cases on both sides, thousands of secretaries, investigators, consultants, inspectors, researchers, attorneys, and judges are now joined by lobbyists, politicians, and their staff. There are many people who are paid from this process. So who is corrupt? Certainly not the Constitution of the United States, which guarantees a trial by jury. How did we solve the problems amongst ourselves until there was a legal system? We solved them by violence. Read the history. What happened when the merchant sold some food that killed somebody? They came back to his store and cut off his head and put it on a pike in front of the store as a warning to other merchants. We don't do that now. I think that's very good. Step forward. But our legal system is a replacement of resolution by violence. And how, therefore, can anyone be excluded? How can you take hundreds of thousands, yet millions, of our best citizens and exclude them from their legal rights? The asbestos victims are the engine that drives this huge social problem through society. The asbestos victims are rarely able to speak freely in their own defense and for their own good, which is why we formed the White Lung Association. We were all union officers. We couldn't get the unions to move. Unions said then exactly what the business community in Libby says today. You say something about asbestos, they're going to close the shipyard. Well, they closed the shipyard anyway. You say something about asbestos, we won't have a job. Well, you don't have a job anyway. Imagine this for a moment. If you were looking at a company, you were going to buy their services. The services were to protect your children. And there's 2 or 3 competing companies. Each has 535 employees. And as you're looking through their various discussions of how they can best protect your children, you come across the fact that one company includes 29 individuals who have been accused of spousal abuse. And you look further, and there's 7 in this company who have been arrested for fraud, 19 who have been accused of writing bad checks, 117 who have directly or indirectly bankrupted at least 2 companies, 3 who have done time for assault, 71 who cannot get a credit card due to bad credit. 14 of these 535 individuals have been arrested for drug-related charges. 8 have been arrested for shoplifting. 21 are current defendants in lawsuits. 84 last year were arrested for drunk driving. What would be your thinking of this company? These are the statistics of the U.S. Congress. We will not be able to proceed with justice with these individuals. The White Lung sees corruption, but it is not exclusively reserved for the legal community. Each of you must think of how your own position will change if the asbestos victims are denied their legal rights. If asbestos, the most widely studied toxin, the most complete human and animal studies, the wheel of disease discovered every 10 years for the last 100, if asbestos is not shunned by society, if it is not banned, if its victims are not provided for, if it is not cleaned up, what will your lot be? How can you protect and protest the reinstatement of DDT? How will you be able to stop oil drilling in every backyard? The restarting of nuclear plants, the inclusion of organic phosphate pesticides. If we, the conscious element, do not take every opportunity to teach the truth about the matters, we condemn our own offsprings. We truncate the evolution of life. We destroy our earth. Libya is another step in the horrific journey of asbestos through society. Baltimore, with tens of thousands of victims. Charlestown, Groton, Boston, Galveston, Mobile, Houston, San Francisco, Oakland, Seattle, Honolulu, Kansas City, Chicago, Detroit, Bennettsville, South Carolina, very similar to Libby. One plant, everybody sick. Chrysotile there. Asbestos, Maryland, Atlanta, and on and on and on. So what are the contributions of the asbestos victims? Well, first of all, everyone agrees that those victims, particularly those that are buried and not cremated, take some of the hazardous asbestos out of society, sort of like the soldier who falls on the grenade to protect their buddies. Sacrifice. Secondly, the asbestos victims have provided medical data for the entire world. Asbestos victims have been the subject of thousands of medical studies, all of which have proven the ill effect of asbestos exposure on humans. More studies of asbestos and its toxicity than any other toxin. Asbestos victims, thirdly, have provided a collective memory to help society focus on the horrible problem of asbestos use and exposure. You see, we're living proof of what happens when you're exposed to asbestos. Fourth, asbestos victims defend the legal rights of all society when they defend their own legal rights. Their defense has curtailed and exposed capital's vain attempt to use the asbestos poison, to bring it back. Fifth, the asbestos victims are primarily responsible for the efforts to identify and abate asbestos in schools and the rest of society. And in 1982, I'll just take 1 second to side note. We had a tremendous battle in the White Lung Association on which way our organization would go in 1982. Many of the people said, no, we must maintain our own compensation. We must struggle for our own compensation. The majority and ultimately the winning grouping said, no, we need to concentrate on the children. We need to bring the problem of asbestos in schools immediately to the public. To us, the public says, well, you guys got sick, you worked, you probably knew it, blah, blah. But the children, they will turn around and listen. And sure enough, eventually that blossomed with the help of thousands of other environmentalists and active individuals to the AHERO law. Sixth, the asbestos victims are the spear point in the effort to ban asbestos. Seventh, the asbestos victims provide financial, logistical, political, and emotional support for the public health workers and environmentalists throughout the world. 8, they represent the past and they represent the future. 9, they are dedicated to awakening and organizing the world to eliminate this toxin and make cleanup and restitution for its use. 10, the asbestos victims have presented 2 different programs for the resolution of the asbestos problem. The first, presented 5, 6 years ago by the White Lung Association. And this is, again, after a lot of discussion. What do we want? What would we be willing to do to trade? What would we accept for not going to court? And the entire grouping agreed on this simple program, administered by the Department of Labor, which would be that upon diagnosis of any asbestos-related disease, the individual would be issued a check for $25,000 within 30 days, and thereupon a check for $2,000 a month for the rest of their life, which could be given to their spouse if they died. In addition, the Department of Labor would buy supplemental insurance to provide full health care for those individuals and their families for life, along with Medicare and Medicaid. I get letters every day, people saying, hey, sign me up. I heard about the White Lung program. That's great. I'm tired of waiting for all this. I don't want pie in the sky by and by. Give me something solid, and I'll turn over my constitutional right gladly. The second program, which I can't go into because of time, was that the Black Lung Association, Brown Lung Association, and White Lung Association spent 3 years developing a bill on occupational disease, an excellent bill on occupational disease. And so we have submitted that. As you can see, asbestos victims have and continue to contribute mightily to the resolution of this problem. Further proof is the galvanizing leadership of Gayla Benefield and Les Stramstead. Is that correct? Thank you.
Lester.
The role that they and others have played in moving the Libby situation forward cannot be appreciated enough. So in conclusion, I ask you to join us. And of course, we have literature, buttons, pins, etc. And I ask you to join us, and we with you. Join us in the band of asbestos, the cleanup and the restitution. Join us in the struggle for justice. Join us to stand fast against the monstrous but dying beast of asbestos pollution. Join us to stand with us against the slings and arrows of the asbestos industry, their media, and their goons. Join us to never step down or aside in the face of this frantic assault on our children and our planet. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gayla Benefield. I think I've probably met most of you by now. I didn't come prepared. I didn't write a speech. Usually when I talk, I just shoot from the hip, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. Well, I'm close to the door. I'm going to start by reading you a poem, and just think about this. It means a lot to me. And it says, small town folk have strong ideals. Love your job, it provides meals. Listen to the boss, he's from the big city. Hug the executioner, ain't it a pity? Piles of dust lying on the ground, piles of dust floating around. Children in the dust playing kids' games, hug the executioner, ain't it a shame? The jobs are gone, the bosses are gone, the money's all gone, but the dust holds on. Holds on to the gardens, holds on to the town, holds on to the lungs, people going down. People dying young and old, dust in their lungs, nobody told. Now people talk between dry coughs. Damn the executioner, the dust is killing us off. And you know, after listening, meeting Bill, Paul, of course I'd known Jim, this poem could have been written in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. Any decade, any decade. But my daughter wrote it in 1999, or actually 2000. And she wrote it in response to a question her 10-year-old daughter asked her. She said, am I going to die of this too, Mom? And you know, really, that was the catalyst. That was the catalyst, really, that I think the final catalyst that propelled me to doing something. At that point, this was 1999, Les knew that his 2 children were diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed yet. Les had the disease, his wife. But I'd known Les's family, and I knew the children when they were babies, the 2 years that he worked at the mine. And suddenly it became real to me that it wasn't the workers, and it wasn't the workers' wives, and it wasn't long-term exposure that was causing this disease in town, this insidious disease. So me and my buddy Lester set off to change the world, right, Les? Oh, I'd call him once in a while and say, oh my God, Lester, what kind of a pickle we get ourselves in this time? And along came Andy. I mean, Andy literally is like an angel. He just sort of fell from the sky on us. Well, he did. I didn't really like him, and he didn't like me. He didn't go that far to say it in the book, but we really didn't get along. I thought he was a pompous ass, and he thought I was crazy. Well, he had to call me first after that, remember? But Andy came, and you know, we'd had all these suspicions. I had documents, we had suspicions, and for years. My father died in 74 of this. My mother was diagnosed in 1985 of secondary exposure. And you keep saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, and every day it seemed to get worse. I'd look at the Little League ball fields next to the old expanding plant, and I'd think, are they polluted? I'd talk to the town officials, to the elected officials. They say, oh, well, Grace shut the dry mill down in 1974. There's no problem now. But yet the men kept dying, and the women were continuing to be diagnosed. And by 99, people were coming in calling me that had nothing to do with the mine site, that were being diagnosed with the disease. And it seemed like it was time. And like I say, we had no power. Les and I had tried all summer to do something. Again, I mean, the diagnosis of his children, I think, was really the catalyst, because it told me that if his children could be sick, possibly mine could. I hadn't been diagnosed yet, so it pretty much guaranteed that I would be diagnosed. But when Andy came, Andy listened the second time he came. I've got to give him shots. He's a beautiful person. He just doesn't want anybody to know how nice he is. But Andy did listen, and it wasn't that he saw a story. I mean, you say, newspaper reporter. No, he saw something there. He saw something that was happening, and he recognized it. We were living in the eye of the storm, that it was starting to become normal for someone to turn 60 years old and go on to oxygen, or someone to retire at 62 or 63 and not live to 65. This was getting to be the normal realm of things within our circle, because our circle was the working class. The men in Libby always worked hard. They worked at the mill, they worked at the mine, they would go out and they'd think, I could be killed today, but my family will be taken care of. No man would ever go to work thinking I could be killed today, but what is killing me today could come home and kill my wife and my children. And that was the difference in Libby. But Andy came and the story broke in November of '99, and boy, did the crap start hitting the fan around there. He was referred to as one of those Inquirer-type reporters. And actually, it was even in the newspaper. The group of the town fathers, the chamber, got together and said, well, we knew people were dying, but we thought it was just a bunch of miners and their family. What kind of a community sacrifices one segment of the community for dollars? I mean, this was the most hurtful thing that could have been said to any of us. It meant our lives weren't worth anything, because this mine that had come to Libby in 1963 and bought the town, paid for everything. They paid for the uniforms for the children, for the Little League. And they gave them the field to play on right next to the expanding plant. They paid for the remodeling of the hospital and made sure their insulation was inside it. It was unreal. We had an uphill battle. Thank God for Chris and Paul and Aubrey showed up. I was surrounded by all these young men. I think I have children younger than they are. And I said, oh my God, hippie and yuppie, and what did I call him? But these people, they had the passion. They looked at this, they came back, they said, oh my God, what happened to this town? And this is the thing. Anybody who comes into Libby, who gets involved with this, they have the passion. They have the passion. I went to Washington, D.C., Les and I did, and a few others in 2000, March of 2000, to fight this same fairness bill, only a different one, that Jim was talking about. There was a press conference in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol. And would you believe out of that there was 3 reporters that were wiping their eyes when we got done talking? Now, this never happens. I mean, these people, they hear the story, think, oh my God, it can't happen. But you know what they do? They come out and say, what can we do to help? But never in downtown Libby, unless you are diagnosed with a disease, does anybody come up and hold their hand out and say, I want to help you. This is the tragedy, the real tragedy. But we did get the screening. We confirmed our worst fears. More people were sick in Libby than anyone could have imagined. Not sick so much as diagnosed with pleural plaquing. We got the cleanup. Paul and Chris and Aubrey came. They did all the science. They said this fiber, there's something different about this fiber. Well, we already knew it. W.R. Grace knew it all along. It wasn't a mine fiber. When we talk about asbestos mines and asbestos millings and Owens Corning and Johns Mansville, They were asbestos companies. Ours was a vermiculite company. And that's where W.R. Grace managed to shove this through the cracks all the years. Because it was not a mined substance. It was a tramp substance. Oh, they had monitors out checking for asbestos, and they calculated with their own men from where they worked, how many hours they worked, how many asbestos years they had in their bodies. They knew all along that it was coming home on the work clothes. They knew the 5,000 pounds of asbestos they were spewing into the air had to be coming over the town. But it wasn't a mine fiber. And it fell through the cracks. And they managed to avoid having the mine shut down simply because they manipulated the system. There was never an inspection at the mine, but there wasn't a warning to the men. The inspectors are coming. Wash down the mine, wet everything down, clean this down, cut production down. Because if the inspectors come and find a problem, you'll lose your job. That was historically from the day W.R. Grace, actually the day my father went to work in 1954 until the mine shut down in 1990. The big cry always went up, the inspectors are coming. I mean, this was the most horrific thing in the world that could be plunked right out in the middle of a beautiful valley. It should have been shut down in 1960, 1970, 1980. 1980, they were ready to shut it down. Ronald Reagan was elected into office. J. Peter Grace was appointed the head of the commission to cut environmental spending. The direction was turned. They said, we will remove asbestos from the schools. That was the end result. The asbestos pipe. We cannot have our children. We have zero tolerance for asbestos. But they didn't examine the schoolyards. In Libby, the running track Andy deferred to. In 1973, that was made from tailings from the mine. When we talk about tailings, we aren't talking about the mineral. We're talking about the garbage. The running track was made from pure tailings, and it wasn't covered with asphalt until 1983, after one of Grace's safety men and his wife ran the track with monitors on a rainy day. The wife ran behind, and her exposure was 1,000 times what was allowable at that time. And so the county came in and put asphalt on it. The elementary school, April 6, 2002, Max Bacchus came to Libby. After he left, I found out that they had a 40 by 40 foot ice skating rink at the elementary school that had been there for 25 years, and it was full of tailings. I've never been so angry in my life. I know how Les felt, and I know his anger now, because all of my children went to that elementary school, kindergarten through grade 5. 9 out of 11 of my grandchildren went to that elementary school. Their first day of school wasn't the first day of school of learning, it was the first day of exposure. This is what's prompted me to keep pushing on this thing. We have the Center for Asbestos-Related Disease. We have a staff that has got the passion. We have Dr. Whitehouse who has the passion. We have medical facilities contacting us with the passion, because the only hope we have in Libby is not to remove the fiber, but to nullify. We will have to nullify the fiber, because I don't think it's ever going to be completely removed. The EPA came in and started cleaning the town, and it was under emergency response. Possibly it was a little bit of an overkill in a sense, because they simply wanted to remove all of it. They were going to remove it from, they said at first they couldn't remove it from the walls of the houses, then they got the okays. We'll remove all of your insulation, we'll replace it, we're going to remove all of your grass in your yards, we're going to replace it with sod. They did manage to get the hot spots cleaned up. They got the high school, the elementary school, where the children play is safe. But in the last 4 years, it's gone down to containment. They'll leave it in the walls. They'll walk into a house, say, we might not be back for 2 years because of our schedule and money cuts. But if you'll take some caulking, go around the edge of that ceiling there and go around that ceiling fan up there and be sure and pull your light switches out and put caulking and stick them back in there, we'll get to you. And then they give you this. This is a present. This is the EPA's removal policy, I'm sorry to say. That is a HEPA vac. After they clean a house, they give you a HEPA vac. If the wait is too long, you'll get a HEPA vac. You are supposed to protect yourself with a HEPA vac. I'm really sorry to say. Something has failed in the system. I don't think that HEPA vac is worth $100. And that HEPA vac is only as good as the person that turns it on and operates it. So how are the children being protected in the homes? Because this stuff is still coming down. We were informed this year that our budget was cut. We're trying desperately to get it back, but there's no money there. We tried to tell our elected officials to reenact the Superfund tax. Actually, I talked to Lois Gibbs. I was on she is the mother of Superfund from Love Canal. And in trying to reenact the Superfund tax. And then there would be money for cleanups. Washington didn't want to listen to that, my God. We're talking about taking money out of the corporate pocketbook. That didn't pass. No, Libby has left the number one Superfund priority in the United States of America was cut $5 million this year. And that would have cleaned up a lot of homes. That doesn't sound like much. We had a budget originally of $21 million for a year's work in Libby. We could have used 3 times that much and gotten 3 times as much done, but instead, production has slowed down, so what do? We go to cleaning up 5 homes better or 10 homes not so well. And when we complain, we're being told you're getting more than the other 35 million homes out there. You're getting part of yours removed. Well, which part of it made people sick? Which part of it, the top half or the bottom half that killed my father or my mother or that made me sick? We're still fighting in Libby. With every breath that we have got, Levitt, Administrator Levitt, is supposedly coming to Libby and going to allow us 15 minutes of his time. We're going to do everything within our power to tell him that it's too late for my generation and possibly my children's, but there are my grandchildren. I want to see my children's lives extended, their quality of life extended. And I want to see my grandchildren never have to get sick, because right now, my grandchildren have already watched people die of this disease in our family. The youngest person right now to be diagnosed is 42 years old because of the latency period. My oldest daughter is 41, and that probably will be starting. But then my grandchildren, and I want to see a change. I want to do everything I possibly can to see a change. We fought the fairness bill. We went to Washington, D.C. I went back again last June and listened to Orrin Hatch. I hung on the chair with both hands, and I won't elaborate why. And it was unbelievable, because they didn't even address our disease. This year when the bill came up, Dr. Whitehouse sent Orrin Hatch a statement stating, if this bill passes, 90% of the people in Libby will not meet the criteria because our disease is a little bit different. I want to borrow your balloon. Imagine this is your lung. Now, I've seen this in court. It really works. This is your lung. This is the lining of your lung. Actually, it is even thinner than that. It's like saran wrap. But when our fiber goes in, it goes to the outside lining of the lung and lodges in the pleura and causes scarring. And it causes this lining that your lung is encased in to get the thickness of an orange rind before it ever goes interstitial. But the fairness bill that the government is trying to push down our... Oh! Sorry, I lost the balloon. Get your gun out, Andy, and shoot it. But the fairness bill that the government is pushing, they're not even looking at this disease. We had 90 expanding plants around the country. We had 300 facilities that produced this material. So Libby isn't the only place with this form of asbestos-related disease either. Not just Libby, Montana. But W.R. Grace is the cause of everybody out there with this form of asbestos-related disease. So who is getting protected? We try to convince them, no, we won't meet the criteria. And the sun will rise in the west and we will all be healed the day that they sign the bill. The only advantage we've got the Center for Asbestos-Related Disease in Libby. They take care of the patients. They take good care of me even. And we treat, this is just what we treat, is tremolite-related, asbestos-related disease. I mean, this blossomed from the screening and from the EPA showing up. What is happening in the Card Center in Libby is everything that I had hoped for while my mother was dying, because there was nothing. No one would talk to her about her disease. No one knew anything about her disease. They couldn't even treat her disease. They treated the symptoms. At the Card Center, they treat the whole person from stem to stern, from your family, for the psychological aspect of the disease, right down to not your symptoms of your disease, but your disease. This is how far we've come, and we hope to go farther. We hope to go into research on this because of the uniqueness of our disease. And that will give hope. But right now, this is really sort of ironic, because while we talk about treatment of the disease, we talk about cleanup. Actually, my fellow colleagues, shall I call it, just about covered every base that I was going to hit today, so I had to dig up a few new things. But this was just in the newspaper, and this is a statement on the $54 million that they are appealing now. In its brief Monday, the company concedes there is no question, and Grace does not deny, the workplace conditions at the Libby Mill from the 1930s until the installation of the wet mill in 1974 were dangerous and tragically caused or contributed to disease and or death as a result of asbestos disease. We had to go to court to even prove that they had asbestos up there because they would never admit it. Les had to go to court. And they had to prove to a jury that there was asbestos up there because that company never admitted it because they didn't mine it. And then they tried to say everything stopped in 1974. But people who have gone to work after 1974 are sick too. They couldn't deny it. But this was the logic, the arrogance. But the company denies that contamination in Libya in 1999 represented an emergency requiring an immediate and more expensive response. By the company's standards, and basically with what we're looking at right now, the government standards are to the level where technically it's almost safe to live in Libya, that you aren't going to die of it. We have the blessing of the government right now. And this is how far we've come from Chris and Paul and Aubrey coming and saying, oh my God, it's dangerous, getting all of the methodology, all of the microscopes, everything else to prove that this fiber was dangerous, and they had 1,000 sick people to back it up. We're back to this point. And a vacuum cleaner. Here it says the agency not only had no incentive to choose a rational or cost-effective response, but a perverse incentive to overprotect against risk, the brief said. This is Grace's responses. They overprotected us. They tried to help us. And we're busy, we're fighting, we're starting right back up the ladder again. We've come light years from where we were in 1999 when this story broke. Absolute light years. We call it just this one little speed bump in here, and I think it's more of an administration. We have dedicated people working in Region 8, but they're taking orders from Washington, D.C. right now. It's tragedy. But we do have people that are willing to work on this. We have Gordon Sullivan, he's our technical director for the TAG. We've got Lester, my buddy over there, and Narita. Mike Krill from Libby originally. And right now the organizations we've got in Libby, just to fight this, of course we've got the Lincoln County Asbestos Victims Relief Organization. That was started 1998. And that's basically for education to try to help people. Actually, our original intent was to try to keep people healthy enough to get to court so they could not have to take an out-of-court settlement because they needed the money. And then we have the Center for Asbestos-Related Disease. I'm a board member of that. Pat Cohen over here is our chief. And then we have the ARDNet, and that's probably the most powerful group in Libby right now. And that is a group of all of the medical facilities and agencies that take care of people with asbestos-related disease in one room. There's no duplication of services. There's no duplication of grants. We discuss problems. We come to solutions on how to care for somebody, whether it's to how to find them a ramp or a wheelchair or what this person might need as far as yard work. It is fantastic, and that has formed, and that is, like I say, probably the best group, and actually I'm on that too. Then we have the Libby Area Tag Association organization, and basically what we're going to do is try to change the cleanup back to what it was. I'm the chairman of that. And then we have the Citizens Advisory Group. We have Gerald Mueller back there, who is our patient-loving facilitator and has been since day one. And there, and again, it's a group of citizens. But you know the real tragedy? Is that on every one of these groups, there's at least 2 to 3 people that belong to another group. You would think there'd be different people for different things. But there's the same 50, 60, 70 people in Libby that are doing it all. And it is. It's a tragedy. Because there's still people there that say, oh, can't happen, didn't happen. I mean, you know, we're really bucking upstream. We're fighting our neighbors and fighting the federal government on this thing. But it will be. It will be done someday. If nothing else, there is going to be, my grandchildren hopefully will be safe, my children. And if my children are safe, everyone else's children will be. That's all we can hope for. But we're just going to continue to fight. And with the help of Jim over here, and Bill, and Paul, and Andy, you can run, but you can't hide from us, guys. We need you all. So, well, thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Colleen Lux, and I'm here to cover a different base than has been covered so far, and I'm happy to be able to share that with you. I grew up in Kansas City. I didn't really know anything about asbestos until I moved to Missoula, Montana, and I started reading newspaper articles about Libby, Montana. And I got very interested and decided I wanted to pursue my master's thesis up in that community. And it wasn't until I showed up in Libby and went to my first community advisory group meeting that I was completely changed. You can read and read and read and read and read and read all about asbestos, all about the people that are affected by asbestos. It isn't until you meet people that are affected by asbestos that you're changed. And that is what happened to me. And I really enjoyed getting to know people up in Libby. They invited me into their homes for a couple hours so I could pepper them with questions about their groups and things like that. And I ran off and wrote a big fat thesis on it, and it's sitting somewhere on a shelf. But it changed me, and I had planned to go to Australia after I finished my thesis. And as I was researching asbestos and to learn more about the topic in general, I read a lot about international issues with asbestos and saw that there was quite a history of asbestos use in Australia. And I decided that during my trip, I wanted to go and meet some people there, just like I did in Libby. Go there, I'm just going to show up, talk to people. And I started communicating with some people there on email, and we became friends and set up a time to talk, and so I went. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's going on there and let you see for yourself how similar this story is over and over and over again, not just in cities and towns across the U.S., but in places like the Latrobe Valley in Gippsland, Australia. Australia is a very interesting country. It is geographically about the same size as the lower 48 U.S. states. It's huge. It is a big place. However, unlike our fair nation, it only has 20 million people, which compared to our 280, 290 million seems very sparse, and it did feel that way. Yet, despite this small number of people, they have the highest rate, per capita rate, of asbestos disease in the world. And their exposure comes from the same sorts of places that everyone's exposure in the rest of the world comes from mining, from construction, from producing all of the products that have asbestos in it. Let's see. Most Australian homes contain a high amount of asbestos in one form or another. For decades, especially during the housing boom of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the use of asbestos sheeting, fibro boards, and corrugated asbestos roofing were common and pervasive commercial commercial and residential homes and buildings. The Australian environment, the heat, the intense weather that they have, asbestos was a great material for those elements, and it was used pervasively. Australian companies like James Hardie, Colonial Sugar Refinery, or CSR, and Wunderlich manufactured most of the asbestos products that have been used in thousands of commercial and residential buildings in Australia. As is the case with asbestos companies around the world, these companies knew the risks of their products, yet failed to warn both their workers and their consumers. The real awareness about asbestos in Australia started with the mining and milling of blue asbestos by the CSR company in Wittenoom, Western Australia. The Wittenoom story is Australia's Libby. From the time the mining started here in 1938 until it ceased in 1966, the mine was notorious for its terrible working conditions and a pervasive blue haze in the community. During the years of the mine's operation, some 20,000 men, women, and children lived and worked in the community. It is estimated that hundreds to thousands are estimated to suffer from asbestos-related disease today from Wittenoom. And unlike Libby, that town is fighting to get a cleanup, they simply abandoned the town and no one lives there anymore. There's maybe 40 people that live there, and it's essentially been condemned by the government. The knowledge of the asbestos disaster in Wittenoom raised awareness about the dangers of asbestos. In 1979, in response to the tragedy, victims and their family members formed the first asbestos support and advocacy group in Australia, the Asbestos Disease Society of Australia. Over the years, many groups have formed as the asbestos victim population in Australia has grown beyond just those affected at Wittenoom, but to include the ship workers, the construction workers, the home repair people, things of that nature. These groups provide a variety of functions for asbestos victims, ranging from legal and medical advice, counseling and support services for victims and their family members. While I was in Australia, I visited people from all three of these groups. I spent the most time with the Guards Group, or the Gippsland Asbestos-Related Disease Support Group, in the Latrobe Valley, which is just east of the city of Melbourne in the state of Victoria. In early March, I spoke with members of the Gippsland Asbestos-Related Disease Support Group, and I spoke to them about Libby. I told them the history of the town and a little bit about what had happened there and what I had done there, and I showed them photos of how beautiful it was. They were very impressed. And today, I hope to share a little bit about their story with you. The Latrobe Valley is one of the largest brown coal deposits in the world. Correspondingly, it also has one of the highest concentrations of coal-fired power plants in the world. For decades, thousands of men and women worked and visited these power stations in the Latrobe Valley. For decades, these power stations were full of asbestos used to insulate the equipment, the hot, heated equipment in the power stations. The raw asbestos was mixed with water and other things, slapped on things to insulate it, ripped down by the men to repair whatever was needed, mixed again, slapped back up, and the process was repeated over and over and over. The result was, for decades, a cloud of white asbestos dust in all of these power stations in the Latrobe Valley. An estimated 6,000 people that lived and worked in this valley are expected to suffer from asbestos-related disease, 6,000 people. I'd like to show you some news footage that the group gave me about the situation in the Latrobe Valley so you can hear straight from the folks that I met about their experience. So hold please while I go the technological route. Get this thing going.
It's done to you.
Virtually killed me. I'm a vegetable as it is now.
For 22 years, this has been a daily ritual for Barry Lewis, a one-time rigger in Victoria's old State Electricity Commission.
And the heart, 5 bypass are done on the heart, vascular surgery, I've had 5 bubbles put into the veins, a stent put into the heart to hold the heart up.
I feel cheated, and I think it's a horrible thing for anyone to have to go through. And if you've watched anyone suffocate to death, it's just disgusting. I wouldn't want to see anybody go through that.
Vicky Hamilton now remembers with horror her father and grandfather coming home to their families coated in asbestos dust.
Me running up to him and giving him a kiss and wiping it off his chin and saying, "Oh, look, you look like Santa Claus." That was my first memories of asbestos.
Because he was so angry, he handled the raw asbestos. And he used to pick the kids up and kiss them and give them a cuddle when he come home from work, like any father would do.
Coated in asbestos.
Yeah.
Faye Needham says her husband Arnold is another victim of the silent killer, which has claimed countless lives in Victoria's industrial Latrobe Valley, the key supplier of power to Victoria and South Australia.
He has lost his kidneys. His lungs are very coated with asbestos. He's lost both legs and his hands are on the way out. He's not a healthy boy at all.
How old is he now?
66.
Do you think he'll be around for a lot longer?
This week I would surprise me if I didn't have him much more than a couple of weeks.
Between the 1930s and 1980s, asbestos was used in the construction of just about everything as Australia industrialised, from the pipes, walls and floors in the power stations to the homes of those who worked in them. 20 years ago, it was finally made public what many had long feared. Asbestos is one of the most deadly materials known to man.
And just remember that those power stations and the electricity that they produce has not only been built on the sweat of the workers of Latrobe Valley, but also on their blood.
Dr. Tony Sassy says the great tragedy for those workers exposed to asbestos is that authorities across the country are now wiping their hands of the men and women who spent their lives in state-owned power stations.
In the power industry right across the country, asbestos has been widely used. It is a national problem, without doubt, particularly also in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales.
According to doctors, the life expectancy for a former power station worker here in Victoria's Latrobe Valley is just 55. It's known that 140,000 people work in these stations over the danger period. And that doesn't include contractors, visitors, or the workers' families, who are also exposed to deadly asbestos on almost a daily basis. The experts say that here alone, the death toll in the next few years will measure in the thousands.
Well, we were cheap workforce, weren't we, to keep the electricity commission going? And it didn't really matter, did it? That's how I'm starting to look at it. That's how I feel now, that my father was just expendable.
Some families threatened legal action and were paid out. Barry Lewis won a paltry $35,000 for his death sentence. Now, however, thousands of former workers are sick and approaching their life expectancy. Victims say that is a ticking time bomb, which governments fear will cost an estimated $6 billion in compensation.
You've got to understand I was a very, very sick man at the time when they paid me off, and the solicitors told me to take 3 years to take it to court, and then it wasn't guaranteed.
There really should be a very simple, no-fault, straight up and down compensation system that takes the stress off the families.
I reckon because we can't make a claim now, we don't want money. A 5-cent claim, a 5-cent win would just prove that it wasn't our fault.
Sadly, this is a problem which won't go away. Industrial Australia is still thick with asbestos, and those who spent a lifetime breathing it in.
In my house, I can see 26 houses from my front gate of people that have been very sick or have died of asbestos.
These are the people that I met. These are the people that took me around the Latrobe Valley, fed me tea and crumpets, and we went on a tour of power stations, and they're wonderful people. I had a wonderful time with them. And it just highlights to me again that the tragedy of asbestos is very similar the world over. There are elements of this story that are very much the same. Even the words that the people use to describe themselves, their anger, their frustration, are the exact same. And it's simply the geography that's separating them. This is a banner at the Guards office that they bring out every year in late November for Asbestos Awareness Day in Australia. And I think that the banner says it all, and it says it well. We must remember and care for the people that have been affected by asbestos. I feel it is really important for people suffering from asbestos injustices to hear the stories of other people that are going through the same thing, to know that they aren't alone. It's important for the rest of us, the lucky ones, that aren't suffering yet, to hear their voices, recognize how widespread this problem has been, will be, and is today. I'm very pleased to have been asked to participate in this today, and I hope that I was able to bring a little bit about their story to you. Thank you.
It's been a long day, and almost everything I've wanted to say has been covered. So I'm just going to highlight a few pieces here. I think I have about 15 minutes before the 5 o'clock end of the day. Colleen took us into more of a global, away from the national scene. So I just would like to, I've been shifting papers around here as topics have been covered. I've been throwing them away, and I'm down to the last few here. So one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about, just as a resource, the March issue of Environmental Health Perspectives, which is a peer-reviewed scientific journal, has a wonderful article by Joe Ledoux in there on the global perspective of asbestos disease. And Joe has worked very hard at trying to flush out the numbers of where we stand today, but he predicts in this article that by the time asbestos is banned, whenever that might be, that there's going to be over 10 million deaths from asbestos cancer alone, not counting, the fibrotic end of asbestos disease. I've always been wary of figures because it's very difficult in the last 20 to 25 years that I've been involved in this. Probably 90% of the time the figures have not been right as I look back. It's a very difficult kind of statistical prediction to do, to come up with a figure. So I don't know how accurate Joe's figure is here, but it's a figure that I've just become acquainted with in the last month or so. But it's at 10 million. So be that as it may. The other thing is, I want to talk about a couple of different issues here. And one is I certainly want to get into, although it has been covered, I'd like to add a little bit more of my comments to Senate 2290. The Hatch-Frist bill. And then I want to talk just briefly about my own case and W.R. Grace. And I think I'll start there. This is a very brief one. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but we were struck by lightning twice by W.R. Grace. Paul mentioned earlier the Civil Action, the great book written by Jonathan Haar, an old friend of mine. I was producing a documentary on the United Farm Workers throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s, and was shuttling back and forth from the West Coast to my parents' home at 8 Henry Avenue, which was smack dab right in the middle of that cancer cluster. So it was W.R. Grace's trichloroethylene that is in my system and has been in my system. I stopped drinking tap water in the 1970s because of the quality of water in that community, and literally have not touched very much tap water in my life. I have a reverse osmosis system in my own house, and I've gone to bottled water, as many other people have. So I don't have very much trust for municipal tap water any longer. And I think that if you lived on a street where you had 8 children within 75 yards of your house die from leukemia, you'd probably feel the same way. But that was the first time that W.R. Grace struck. We lost the value of our house that my father had built. We lived in it for 11 years. Once Senator Kennedy came to the neighborhood and declared it a dead zone, of course, all of the real estate values tumbled. So that was the first hit. And then a few years later, in 1980, my father was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma. And he survived about 8.5 months from the time of diagnosis. And of course, at that point, or shortly thereafter, I sued 28 companies. And I sued them in First Federal District Court in Boston. Judge Ryers-Obel was a General Electric trained attorney, a corporate attorney. And in 13 years, and I think most people here have had a civics class, probably around the 7th or 8th grade, and we were all told that we would have a chance at justice, and that chance at justice would allow you a jury trial or a trial, one of the two. Well, I waited 13 years in federal court, never had a trial. Judge Ryers-Obel rolled the docket 11 times in 13 years, 11 cases. There were 3,000 cases ahead of my father's mesothelioma, wrongful death, failure to warn, negligence. You can't get any higher in a civil court than a wrongful death. My case, along with many other mesotheliomas and lung cancers, never got to court. And what happened was all of the companies that we had sued, with probably 2 to 3 exceptions, had had enough time in those 13 years to go into bankruptcy. And I became a guinea pig, I guess, for representing my father in the suit for the Manville Settlement Trust. So as I get into the Senate 2290, the Hatch-Frist bill, and I really have a hard time even using the word fairness to it in its title, I was not, Paul mentioned that they were giving 5 cents on the dollar right now in the Manville Settlement Trust. I got a penny on the dollar after a 14-year wait from that settlement trust. So I'm a product of a trust system that's in place, and when I start rolling out the other bills that were put forth, I'm coming at you from being an example of someone whose family, myself and my mother, have gone through this with a trust fund set up not by Congress, but this trust fund was set up by the bankruptcy court in New York. I think as I look back on the Manville Settlement Trust after waiting that long, one of the things that hurt the most was to read in the headlines of page 8, or the smaller headlines on page 8 or page 20, that they had just spent $645,000 on office furniture for the foyer in the settlement trust. Money was going out that door as fast as could go in almost every direction but to the victims. And I believe to date, the Manville Settlement Trust has had 573,000 claims against it. Today, there are, I think, approximately 43,000 that have not been settled at all. And I don't know how much money they have left, but if they're at a nickel on a dollar right now, I'll guarantee you before those other 43,000 people, they'll be back to what I received, which was a penny on the dollar. And after 28 companies that we had sued, if you added up all of the money that I received, it was less than the cost of the funeral, the medical expenses, and 1 year of lost pay for my father. So it didn't cover it. Again, product of a settlement trust. So now I'd like to get into the Fairness in Asbestos Injury and Resolution Act of 2004, the Hatch-Frist Bill. I'd just like for you to remember the name of that, because we're going to see that name reappear in another version quite quickly. Fairness in Asbestos Injury and Resolution Act. Of course, Frist and Hatch have been meeting secretly with, guess who? Paul brought this up earlier. With Halliburton, of course, and other asbestos companies, as well as the insurance honchos. And their first act was to put limits on the amount of money. The first figure that came out for this bill was $150 million. And by the time Halliburton walked out of the room, it was ratcheted down to $114,000. It's now back up to 124, I believe, is the last figure I heard. I don't know if Paul... billion, I'm sorry, billion. B for billion, pardon me, billion. 113 to $124 billion. And 150 billion, let me go back to the beginning there, I'm sorry. And that was the amount of money into the trust for a 27-year period. So it was amended down. And now what we have is basically a money game going on. There's another 2-week effort going on in the Senate where they're going to try and resurrect the bill again. I don't think they're going to have enough time to do it. They need to raise at least a minimum of $50 billion more to make this thing a go, to bring some of the unions on and some other Democratic senators. The insurance companies have set the line in the sand right now at $46 billion for their contribution. They're not going to go a cent higher than that. So I don't see where they're going to find $50 billion. So I do think that this bill is going down and all the way down. I don't think it's going to get resurrected. And of course, Halliburton, Paul brought up a figure of $6.5 billion that this bill would save. Other companies, of course, another 20 or 30 other companies will probably save in the vicinity of $1, $2, $3, $4, or $5 billion as well. And what is this bill going to? What would this bill have done? It would have denied hundreds of thousands of Americans their day in court. That's very familiar to me. It would reduce damage awards to victims of asbestos disease. And finally, and of course, it will run out of money before a large portion of whomever is in the trust would have their claims resolved, I should say. So, another effort at a trust. Let me give you some examples of other ones that have been in front of us over the years here. The Wellington Trust. The asbestos companies went to the Dean Wellington of the Yale Law School, and said, help us out. And of course, Dean Wellington tried to help them out and put together an effort to bail out the asbestos companies. Fortunately, that did not go anywhere, but it held the front lines of efforts by both Congress and the asbestos industries for well over 2 years. It looked like it was a large fight to get that effort defeated. After the Wellington Trust, of course, we then went into the Center for Claims resolution called CCR. That's when 20-plus asbestos companies came together, called in all of the attorneys on both sides, and said, let's make a deal. And that deal, of course, would have screwed all of the asbestos victims. That was another major battle that we went through. And then after that, as Paul mentioned, was Representative Millicent Fenwick from where? New Jersey. Who was in New Jersey? Johns Manville Corporation. Who was she trying to bail out? Johns Manville and the other asbestos corporations. And then, of course, one of the most insidious ones, and Jim Fite fought this one with the white lung very diligently for quite a long time, and that was Representative Henry Hyde's Fairness. Remember that word? Fairness in Asbestos and Compensation Act. And the bill's major proponent was GAF's CEO, Sam Heyman. Sam owned 98% of that company of GAF. They bought it from Ruberoid some years ago. They had spent $7.1 million on lobbying in 1 year alone to push this bill forth. The White Lung Association dubbed this legislation the Asbestos Industry Relief Act. And I believe that was Jim who coined that. GAF also created a front group, God knows how much money they put into this, which was called the Coalition for Asbestos Resolution, CAR, with 200-plus members, including our old friends that we're all familiar with here, W.R. Grace. W.R. Grace also went out and subsidized the Safe Building Alliance. Safe Building Alliance was put on the front lines, given millions and millions of dollars to basically attempt to resurrect chrysotile asbestos, to tell not only this nation, but the rest of the world that we could use asbestos safely. It's rather ironic that the American College of Chest Physicians, ACCP, endorsed the Henry Hyde Fairness Bill in terms of its medical criteria. Let's take a little closer look at who their lobbyist was. Their main lobbyist was Ray Cooten. Guess who was the main lobbyist for GAF? Ray Cooten. Same for the Medical Society. So you know where that came from in terms of endorsing this. And then, of course, there was Senator Gary Hart and his attempt, and Senator Tim Wirth. These attempts are known in terms of bailouts as the heartless and worthless bills. Congress always seems to find a way to help out their buddies in terms of the bailout efforts, but in 20 years have failed to pass any legislation whatsoever to help out the victims of asbestos-related disease. Tom Daschle quoted some time ago, a month and a half ago on the Senate floor, that he thought the current and future victims of asbestos-related disease is going to be somewhere between 500,000 and 2.6 million people over the next 25 years. And of course, the EPA gets into it here with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they were forced, I don't know by whom, but to take a look at what's going to happen to children with asbestos in place. And they've rolled out some numbers, and again, I don't know how accurate this is, but they estimate that 1,000 American children currently exposed to asbestos in schools will suffer premature deaths over the next 30 years, principally from lung cancer and mesothelioma. And I just would like to draw your attention to Diane Shapiro, who's in the exhibition at the Art Museum of Missoula. She was exposed in high school. They took down the cafeteria ceiling while the children were in the cafeteria, by the way, left piles of asbestos on the floor, and children had to walk over it. And of course, 6 or 7 years thereafter, believe it or not, she came down with mesothelioma. Now you may say that's pretty odd because that's a really short latency period. Well, I've got one that's going to blow your head. His name is John Carson. He was exposed at a young age. He died at age 14 from pleural mesothelioma. His house was here, his father's gas station was here, and the school was here. And every day he walked by the gas station in the morning, waved to his father, went to school. Got out of school at 1:30, came back to the gas station, and stayed at the gas station until his mother got out of work at 4:30. Well, he became the compressed air hose boy, for brake jobs. His father taught him how to do the brake jobs, and he started him out at age 8 or 9 blowing out wheel wells. When he was 8 years old, he could do 8 push-ups. When he was 9 years old, he could do 9 push-ups. When he was 10 years old, he couldn't do 2 push-ups. And when he was 14 years old, he couldn't do any because he was dead. There are, according to Andrew's wonderful book, An Air That Kills, approximately 16 billion pounds of vermiculite from Libya in 750 plants and factories throughout North America. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of that ore was popped and sold as insulation. Remember the number, 15.6 billion pounds. That's tremolite out there. Now let's look at the other side of it with chrysotile. Today's is at least 60 billion pounds of chrysotile asbestos in place in the United States, most of it from Canada, by the way. That's more than 200 pounds per person in the United States. Let's add the two numbers together. That comes up at 75 billion pounds of asbestos have been woven into the fabric of our lives. Is it any wonder, as we look around today, that the financial community seems to be paralyzed over this? 75 billion pounds of a carcinogen woven into our lives. And on a personal note, my daughter, on the street that I live on, she's not allowed to go into anybody's basement on the street that she plays with. And now, after Libby, she's not allowed to go in anybody's attic on the street. So here we have the attics out and the basement areas out. And my daughter thinks that I'm the Olga on the street because I'm restricting her, ability, her range of play, where all the other children on the street are allowed to play in their attics, they're allowed to play in the basements with friable asbestos all over the place. And I look like, one might say, the marginalized crank on the street. That actually hurts the most today for me. So, I think many of the other things I wanted to cover, I wanted to run through some of the waves of asbestos disease and how they've sort of come into our shores. Of course, most of that's been covered today. The first wave, of course, around World War I, with mostly by 1917, people who worked in the mine sites and who separated the asbestos so that it could be woven into textiles. And then, of course, by World War II, the second wave hit in this country, and that was shipyard workers, and you've heard some, large numbers, 21 million of them exposed. 5.5 million of construction workers, along with that 21 million, by the way, were exposed. And that's the first and second wave, and those are people whose jobs pretty much kept them in contact, direct contact, with asbestos. And then, of course, in 1990, Dr. Irving Selikoff held the third wave asbestos conference at the Ramazzini conference in New York City on the third wave of exposure to asbestos, and that is asbestos in place. Of course, it's in our factories, our refineries. We've heard about all the places. Just want to add one that's very familiar to you, gardening products, vermiculite. There was one paper that was presented at the third wave conference that I'll never forget. It told of asbestos fibers being found at autopsy in lung tissue of a full-term, stillborn infant that had never drawn an independent breath on its own. I've stopped there at the third wave, but of course there are many other waves going on. The fourth wave is probably going to be walking into the hospitals in another decade, and that's the asbestos abatement workers in the United States. Many of them use their respirators for ashtrays. There's no oversight going on, and many of the jobs where it's happening, probably well upwards of 50% aren't being done properly in this country. So we're going to have another large wave hitting hospitals, probably by 2010 or 2015. And then a fifth wave, and that fifth wave is because, in particular, the Canadians and the Canadian government dumping asbestos all over the developing world right now. And there are no safeguards there whatsoever. We're talking about large tonnages of asbestos being shipped to Thailand, to Vietnam, to many other countries around the world, South America, Central America, India, where we're going to see these folks walking in with the same stories that we have here in this country. Only it's going to be moving a lot faster there because there's absolutely no public health measures in place whatsoever. So I'm going to leave it at a 5th wave. God only knows there's probably going to be a 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th wave, and I'm sure if I asked Jim Fight how many waves, it would probably even go beyond that. So I don't know if there's time for questions. I have 1 minute past 5. I've gone a minute over, but I'd be happy to answer any if there are, and I think for the rest of the panel as well, if there are
Certainly,
questions.
if there are questions, we've had the 5 o'clock hour, but if we just have a few questions, I'm sure our panelists
Well,
will be happy to answer them.
I'm sorry, I want to just mention one other resource here, and that is Environmental Working Group has a new study out. It's www.ewg, and they have these incredible maps. Do you want to know where Libby's fiber went? Well, here it is, folks. And the bigger the circle, the more the shipments. The largest circles you see here are equated to in the legend of over 2,000 shipments to this one location right here. And of course, this is Montana in here, and who wants to take a stab at what's the largest circle, where it is? Great Falls, Montana. There you go. So, and they also have the government data on asbestos mortality, and this is way underrepresented, but just let me show you. Each one of the dots on here is one death by asbestos cancer, and this is probably at least at a minimum 50% underestimated here. So, and they have many more, so I'd like to try to say to you, get a look at that site. It's very nicely done. Thank you.
I have a question, Jim. What happened to the guts of the union? Why is the union basically why are any of the unions, all of the unions, doing basically nothing on the asbestos issue?
Well, asbestos is just one of the issues that they've been compromised on.
I understand, but I'd like you just to address that one if you could.
With the exception of Tony Mazzocchi and the people around him, we received very little help over the years. Some from the Asbestos Workers Union, some from the Chemical Workers Union, some from UAW. But basically, unions are part of the production. There's capital, there's workers, they work together, and they depend on each other up until about 1970. In this country, production took place, those two working together. And they fought back and forth, but progress was made. When you take the production outside of the United States, the few that are left are terrified. They have to, I remember in the shipyard, we were getting individuals from Korea, and we were teaching them how this shipyard worked. And it'd come break time, they wouldn't take a break. They kept on working. And, you know, we'd go back to the shack and, you know, we're going, well, these guys are making it bad for us. And then now the white hats are saying work through break, just like the guys from Korea. I turned around to one of them, I said, you know, they're getting ready to move this shipyard to South Korea, which is basically what they did. The unions that, when we think of unions in a progressive sense, we're thinking of the 30s, when the UAW sat in to get their union. They took control of the factory. That's a far cry from an organization that was dominated by individuals who worked very closely with the international security apparatus of the United States government. And they're compromised, they're weakened, but the primary thing is that their role in society has been exported. And that's something that we all have to face. The more we become interested in our own environment, and the more we clean that environment up, the more we're outflanked by capital depositing its productive apparatus throughout the rest of the world. And it's a very deep and tremendous problem, but we're not be able to get support from the unions. They're really struggling to maintain their second. And let me roll on this a little bit. The second point is that they've compromised themselves terribly by integrating their entire politics with the Democratic Party. So not only are they lose support from people who don't like the Democratic Party. You know, the population gets a choice of Democrats or Republicans. Do you want to be hit with a mallet or a baseball bat? Well, okay, this year I'll take the baseball bat. But the unions can't, for very specific reasons, are still tied and become impotent politically because of that.
I have a question. I'm wondering, well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that one of the reasons of having this conference and having the show at the Art Museum is to raise public awareness as a solution, but I just sort of want to check that perception. Jim, you talked about that you don't see any real remedies with a Congress that is itself not trustworthy. That was an interesting relay of facts. And Jim and Bill, you were talking about the trust funds that have been set up with the lawyers, and so through legislative and our courts, that doesn't seem to be an easy solution, and maybe that's what I'm looking for. But if you could just speak to, you know, understanding from the work that you're doing, Glenna?
Gayla.
Gayla, I'm sorry.
Close. Good.
Glenna, that, you know, clearly the work is the things that you're doing on a very practical basis. But for those people who are not here today, and even for newcomers like me to this issue, what is going to be the way to change this in an effective way if we are so limited by the structure that we have?
Well, there is no way as long as things remain the same. But things aren't. They only appear to be the same. There's a tremendous restructuring of our country because it's ruled today by an international grouping of financiers whose care is not tied directly to our community. So whereas at one time you might have gotten a turkey from the boss and worked all your life in the mill, those times are over. And so are over all the infrastructure and ways that we solve problems. So I don't know all the answers, but I do know that we need to continue to be sharp in our evaluation and demanding that these problems be brought to the fore so that we can discuss them. But if you look, for instance, at NAFTA, they lined up there Carter, Clinton, Reagan, Ford, they drug them all out, standing in line, holding hands, saying we love NAFTA, regardless of our political battles. And you see them in the Senate, you know, they're bosom buddies. They might be arguing a little bit on the floor, but when a push comes to shove, they're showing each other the great honor of the honorable senator, et cetera, et cetera. We are the ones that have to take power. And by that, I don't mean a political party or even really a class. But we as individuals have to take power from the standpoint, if we don't, we won't survive. Now, most of the people in this country don't understand that because they look at survival as, I have enough to eat, and gas is only $2 a gallon, and, you know, Geritol is $47 a gallon, and they, you know, mesmerize themselves with nuts like Rush Limbaugh. But that can't exist only during a period of relative tranquility economically. Clinton oversaw 8 years of the most fantastic accumulation of wealth that we've ever seen in a short period of time. And yet what did he do? Slashed welfare, turned his back on the environmentalists, and a variety of other things. So we're caught between the devil and the witch. Which one do we want? I don't want either one. And so we have to begin that discussion. And it's not easy, but it was not easy for Thomas Jefferson. And if you want to read a good book read Charles Beard's book on the economic factors of the Revolutionary War. And you'll see that there are tremendous economic forces at play that affect us all. And the first point is to understand those forces. The second point is to say, what do you want? If you ask most of the people in the world or in this country, what do they want? They want life with their children. They want a life better for their children. They want education. The New York Times published an article, which I have up on my wall. It's recounted that if the people of Europe quit eating ice cream for 1 year, there would be enough accumulated money to build schools throughout the world. And if the people of the United States quit using cosmetics for 1 year, there would be enough for health clinics throughout the world. Our world is rich and only waiting for the organization and distribution of those resources for our own betterment and our own survival. Until we begin to wrestle with problems in that sense, we're continually shuffled between groups of robbers who appeal to us, side with me and I'll give you a few crumbs from the table. Yeah, now you know why I didn't get to inspect the White House. When
Just a very quick question for Galen. Does everybody know the year of the first tort lawsuit regarding Libby, and what was its outcome?
Actually, it was 1982. They call it the Gidley-Priest decision. And that allowed the people to file a lawsuit against W.R. Grace. Prior to that, they were protected by workman's comp, and no worker or survivor could file against Grace. But it was 1982. I believe the suit was filed. That's the year the two men died. 1985 came the decision, and at that point, there actually were no court trials. There were settlements for years, but no one actually made it into court with a jury decision until this went in 96 or 97. Time flies, we don't have a clue anymore. I went the year after that, but actually Nessus was the first actual jury decision that Grace was guilty, and I believe mine was the second for wrongful death for my mother.
I wanted to hear sort of people's thoughts on Patty Murray's bill to ban asbestos, and if you felt like a similar bill would be able to pass with a different administration, or that we're just not there yet.
Yeah, I've actually, Patty more or less combined her support behind us over this banning and through the banning of the asbestos. And, well, they have banned it in other countries. My concern, I want to see it banned in the worst way, but my biggest concern is that our fiber and fibers like ours won't come under the ban. There's a seaweed, what is that called? Dolamine. It's down in Nevada. That actually they feel has tremolite possibly in it too. My son was drilling down there in it's an old prehistoric seaweed then. And so this is the only fear that I have, but I think it's a start. Banning asbestos per se. All right, fine, this is a start. Then we can go along and pick up the pieces on the other stuff. But I don't, this administration, no, and possibly in the next 4 years, we may possibly, if the administration changes.
I'll just say quickly that Australia has banned asbestos, and it went into effect the 1st of this year. And there is still concern there that things are getting their names changed and things like that, where things are still slipping in and out across of their borders. But they have made that step. That doesn't do anything about all the asbestos products that are sitting in the country, but it does stop the importation and exportation of asbestos products. So that's a good step for them.
We support Senator Murray's bill. Senator Murray is an excellent example of the type of senator that we need to have in this country. And in my mind, an indicator of when Hatch cleverly linked his bill with hers, we went up there and had a discussion. We said, look, we can't support it because it's linked with the Hatch bill. And she said, yeah, well, I understand. I'm trying to get it separated as quickly as possible. There is an international movement to ban asbestos, which we're active in. It's accomplished in 29 countries to ban asbestos, almost all the European countries. And in fact, Canada went to the World Trade Organization with a case saying that the French wouldn't buy Canadian asbestos, and so therefore it was a violation of GATT. And we helped in that somewhat with the attorneys with the French side, and they were successful. So the World Trade Organization said, no, GATT does not mean that you have to take a toxin like asbestos just because somebody else is selling it.
I just want to mention one other person who's working very diligently on banning asbestos worldwide, and that's Laurie Kazem Allen out of London. She has been the cement amongst the forces in this country that are supporting banning asbestos worldwide. There's a conference coming up in Poland next week, Jim, that Jim's going to, that Laurie, I think, has been instrumental in. There was one in Brazil last year that Laurie helped push forth. This is all rolling forward, and I think we're going to see Japan come up with a ban very soon, probably within the next year or two, and that'll be a milestone. The Japanese are just littered with asbestos. So we'll see, but it looks like the stone is starting to roll much faster now on banning asbestos worldwide.
Questions? All right. I'd like to thank all of you for spending a sunny Saturday afternoon here. And let us please give a hand to all of our participants.